All right, get ready because today we're diving deep into passive consciousness.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is. We're going to be exploring whether free will is, well, is it even real or is our conscious mind just along for the ride?
Big question.
A huge one.
Yeah.
And our sources today are excerpts from a translated discussion. It's fascinating. It mixes scientific research, philosophy, and a dash of mind-blowing possibilities.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack this passive consciousness thing.
So the basic idea is that our conscious mind, it might not actually be making the decisions. It's almost like, we're just watching a movie that our subconscious has already written and directed.
That might sound radical, but this idea, it's actually ancient.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it has roots in Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism. They explore ideas like the no self and acting without intention.
Wow. So in a way, we're kind of revisiting a very old question, but with modern science now. That's really cool. And to kind of help us understand this whole conscious versus subconscious thing, our source uses a really vivid analogy, an iceberg.
The iceberg analogy, it's a classic. It's powerful.
Yeah.
Think about it. The tip of the iceberg, that's the part you see above the water. That's like your consciousness, your thoughts, feelings, decisions, the stuff you're aware of.
Right.
But then underneath, there's this massive unseen bulk. That's your subconscious, where all the automatic processes, instincts, and maybe even the roots of your decisions are hidden.
So that begs the question, if our subconscious is really running the show, what's the point of consciousness then?
Well, consciousness, it has some amazing abilities,
Okay.
like cognition, emotions, and the
Yeah.
one we're kind of dissecting today, free will.
Right.
And our sources, they point to some pretty interesting scientific experiments that suggest our awareness, it might not be as immediate as we think.
Okay, let's get into those experiments. What kind of research are we talking about?
Well, one that really stands out is the 1999 color perception experiment. Researchers, they created these artificial blind spots in people's vision.
Blind spots.
Yeah, and they showed them a red image, then disrupted their vision briefly, and then boom, switched it to green.
So they couldn't see anything during that interruption.
Exactly. But here's the crazy part. They reported seeing green during that blind spot, even though the green image, it hadn't appeared yet.
Wait, so it's like they were seeing the future.
Kind of seems that way, right?
Yeah.
But our source also gives some more everyday examples too.
Oh, like what?
Like, have you ever really looked in the mirror, like really looked?
I mean, I guess. What am I looking for?
Wait, have you ever noticed your eyes moving when you look from one eye to the other in the mirror?
Now that you mention it, I don't think I have.
Yeah, our eyes obviously move, but we don't actually see that movement.
Why not?
Because our brains, they smooth things out, they create this seamless experience, even though there are tiny delays in how we process information.
So my brain is like editing reality.
It predicts the next image and just kind of glosses over the transition. It's wild.
That is what, it's like we're living in a slightly delayed version of reality.
We are.
Are there other examples of this?
Yeah, think about the clock illusion. Ever noticed how the second hand on a clock, it seems to freeze for a split second, longer than a second?
I have.
That's our brain again, predicting the future to make things feel smoother.
Okay, so our brains are always filling in gaps and smoothing things over, but are these delays, are they really that significant?
They might seem small, but they point to something bigger. Our perception of the present moment, it's not as instant as we think, and things get even more interesting when we look at experiments about, the timing of decisions.
You're talking about the famous Benjamin Libet experiment, the one with the finger.
Exactly. The shocking finger experiment. He wanted to know, does the thought come before the action or the other way around? And what he found was pretty shocking.
Lay it on me.
The brain signals for moving the finger, they happened before the person was even aware of making the decision.
So their brain decided to move the finger before they even knew it.
Yeah, and it wasn't a tiny difference. It was a full 0.35 seconds.
Whoa, that's a long time. What does that mean for our understanding of free will then?
It's a big question. It doesn't necessarily mean we're robots, but it does make you wonder who's really in control.
Right. It's like our subconscious is making choices before we even realize it.
It seems that way. It's
Okay.
drawing on our values, our past experiences, maybe even our current situation, and it's just making things happen.
So what if those decision delays are even longer than we thought? Is that possible?
Well, a study in 2008 suggested that the delays could be as long as 8 to 10 seconds.
Wow.
Although there's still some debate about that. But if it's true, the implications are huge.
Huge. Yeah, it begs the question. If our conscious mind isn't the primary decision maker, then who or what is?
Yeah, we're getting to the real mystery, right?
Yeah.
Our source suggests that our subconscious, it might not even be a single entity. It could be a complex system, maybe even multiple agents working together.
Multiple agents.
It's fascinating. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's shift gears a bit and talk about split brain experiments. They offer some really interesting clues about how our conscious and subconscious minds interact.
I've heard of split brain research. It's where they like sever the connection between the two halves of the brain, right?
Right, and this research shows how our conscious mind tries to explain actions that the subconscious has already started.
Okay, give me an example.
So picture this. There's this famous case study from Michael Gazzaniga. He was a leading neuroscientist who studied split brain patients.
Okay.
In one experiment, a patient was shown the command to walk, but only the right side of their brain saw it.
So their left brain, the side that usually handles language, didn't see the command.
Nope. And guess what happened?
What?
The patient got up and started walking.
Whoa, but they didn't consciously know why they were walking.
Exactly. When they were asked why, their left brain, it had to come up with an explanation on the spot. So it said something like, oh, I felt like getting a Coke.
So their right brain initiated the action based on the command, but their left brain, clueless about the real reason, just made up a plausible excuse.
Exactly. It's like our conscious mind is this master storyteller, always trying to make sense of what's happening, even if it doesn't have all the information.
That's incredible. It really makes you question what role our conscious mind actually plays.
It does, but before we jump to conclusions, let's talk about memory and emotion, because they're really crucial to understanding why all of this matters.
Okay, I'm ready to get personal.
Good, because our source highlights a connection between memory, emotion, and the evolution of consciousness. Think about it. We tend to remember actions that were driven by conscious choices.
You're right. I probably don't remember every breath I took today.
Exactly. Those passive actions, they fade unless something unusual happens, but actions we consciously decide to take, especially if there's a strong emotion attached, those stick with us.
So it's like those emotionally charged memories, they're the ones that form our sense of self.
Yeah, they're called episodic memories. They're linked to events, places, people, and of course emotions. They're the memories that feel the most vivid and meaningful to us.
So the memories that make up our personal narrative are really intertwined with our emotions.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that animals with richer emotional lives, like humans and some primates, they tend to have better memories.
Huh. So is there a link between emotion, memory, and the evolution of consciousness?
It's a fascinating possibility. Maybe consciousness evolved to help us make sense of our actions, give them meaning, and turn them into a coherent story of our lives.
Wow, that's a pretty profound idea. So our conscious minds might not be making all the decisions, but they help us understand who we are and why we do the things we do.
It's a really interesting way to think about it, and it also has some implications for artificial intelligence. If we don't fully understand our own consciousness, how can we create truly intelligent machines?
That's a great point. It's something to think about as we continue our deep dive into passive consciousness. So before we went to, I guess you'd say, a commercial break, we were talking about how our conscious minds might be more like storytellers than the actual decision makers.
Yeah, weaving narratives to explain actions our subconscious has already kicked off.
Right, exactly. It's wild. And it makes you wonder, if so much of what we do is driven by the unconscious, what does that even mean for like who we are? Our sense of self.
It's a big question, and our source brings up an idea that adds another layer to all of this, the collective unconscious.
Okay, now we're getting into some deep stuff. What is that exactly?
It's an idea that suggests there's this level of the unconscious that's actually shared by all humans.
Shared by everyone.
Yeah, it's like this reservoir of universal archetypes, instincts, symbols, stuff that influences us without us even realizing it.
Wow, so if part of our subconscious is linked to this like network of shared experiences, does that mean our sense of self is even more of an illusion than we thought?
It's a fascinating question. And our source also points out that this idea of passive consciousness might have roots in some ancient philosophies.
Oh yeah, they mentioned Buddhism and Taoism.
Exactly. And those philosophies offer some really interesting perspectives.
So how do they connect to all of this?
Well, for example, Buddhist teachings emphasize this concept called anatta, which basically translates to no self or non-self.
No self, like we don't have a self.
It's more about challenging the idea of a permanent, unchanging self. That Western notion of a solid me.
Okay, so what are they saying instead?
They're saying what we think of as our identity, It's actually this constantly changing flow of thoughts, sensations, and experiences.
So it's not a solid me, it's like this ever-shifting stream of consciousness.
Exactly. And Taoism adds another layer with the concept of wu-wei.
Wu Wei, what's that?
It's often translated as non-action or effortless action. But it's not about literally doing nothing. It's more about acting in harmony with the natural flow of things.
So aligning yourself with the Tao, the underlying principle of the universe.
That's it. And it kind of resonates with this idea of passive consciousness. If our conscious minds aren't the ones calling the shots, maybe it's about letting go of control, surrendering to the flow.
That's a big shifting perspective. It makes you wonder if all that struggling we do, trying to control everything, is just creating more resistance.
It's an interesting thought. And what's really cool is that these ancient philosophies seem to align with what modern science is discovering about our minds.
So it's like ancient wisdom meeting modern science.
Exactly.
Okay, we've talked about some pretty mind-bending ideas. We've questioned free will, delved into the subconscious, even touched on the collective unconscious and ancient philosophies. But what does all of this mean for us in real life? How can we actually use this information?
That's the key question, isn't it? I mean, if our conscious minds aren't the main decision makers, does that mean we're just like puppets along for the ride?
Yeah, that's what's kind of unsettling. Like, we have less control than we thought.
I get that, but I don't think it means we're powerless. I think it's more nuanced than that.
Okay, explain.
We still have conscious minds, right? We can reflect, we can be aware, we can learn.
So we're not just robots.
No, I see it more as a collaboration, this dance between the conscious and the subconscious.
Hmm. Okay, so how do we become more aware of this interplay?
There are practices that can help, like mindfulness and meditation. They can help us tune in to what's happening inside.
So mindfulness, that's all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Right, and by paying attention, you start to notice those subtle cues and impulses that might be influencing your actions before you're even aware of them. You start to see the patterns.
And as we become more aware, we can make choices that are more aligned with our values instead of just reacting to those unconscious
It's
impulses.
like shining a light on the subconscious processes.
This is starting to make sense. So instead of blaming myself for my shortcomings or feeling helpless, I can approach myself with more understanding.
Exactly. Self-compassion is key. We all have those unconscious patterns and biases, but by recognizing them, we can work with them, not against them.
This makes me think about habits. If so much of our behavior is driven by subconscious patterns, how do we break bad habits or create good ones?
That's a great point. It's where this interplay between the conscious and subconscious really comes into play.
So it's not enough to just decide to change. I have to really feel it, connect with the motivation to make it stick.
Exactly. Things like visualization, affirmations, finding ways to make the new habit enjoyable can help. It's about creating a positive emotional association.
That makes sense. And remember how we talked about our brains filling in the gaps in our perception?
Yeah.
Could that be related to why we sometimes sabotage ourselves when we try to change? Like our brains are so used to the old way, they resist the new, even if we consciously want it.
That's a really interesting connection, and it ties into what we know about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change.
So our brains are wired for the familiar, even if it's not good for us.
It's about creating new neural pathways, and that takes time and effort.
And persistence, I guess.
Definitely. You have to consistently choose the new behavior, even when your brain wants to fall back into old patterns.
It's like retraining your brain.
Exactly.
This is all starting to click. But what about the bigger picture? I mean, if our actions are influenced by this subconscious that we're not always aware of, what does that mean for things like responsibility and free will in like a legal or ethical sense?
That's a huge question, and philosophers and legal experts have been debating it for ages.
No easy answers, huh?
Not really, but our source does bring up some points that could inform the debate.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, think about it. If our conscious minds are basically making up stories to explain actions that our subconscious has already started, does that mean we're less responsible for our actions?
It kind of makes you question our whole system of justice.
Right. I mean, if we're not fully aware of why we do things, can we really be blamed for the consequences?
It's a tough one, some might say, that even if we're not always in control, we're still responsible for our character, for developing our self-awareness and making choices that align with our values.
It's not about denying the subconscious. It's about taking responsibility for the interplay between the conscious and unconscious.
So it's like this collaborative responsibility.
I like that. And this perspective could change how we think about things like criminal justice, rehabilitation, social policies, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's not just about punishment anymore. It's about understanding the root causes of behavior and finding better solutions.
Exactly. And it shows how important research is. We need to keep learning about consciousness, the subconscious, all the factors that shape who we are.
It seems like the more we learn about the mind, the more we realize we don't know.
It's true, and that's what makes this exploration of passive consciousness so fascinating. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being open to new possibilities.
Well said. And speaking of new possibilities, there's one last question we need to address. If our subconscious minds are influenced by this collective unconscious, what does that mean for who we are, for our sense of individual identity and responsibility?
Now, that's a question that deserves its own deep dive, and luckily, that's exactly where we're headed next.
Perfect timing. It's a topic with some serious implications, stuff that gets to the core of what it means to be human.
I can't wait.
And we're back, still diving deep into passive consciousness. And now we're heading into maybe the most fascinating part, the collective unconscious.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
Right. It makes you question everything we think we know about, well, about ourselves.
It does. The idea of a collective unconscious, it suggests there's this deeper level of the psyche, something that connects us all beyond our individual identities.
So it's like there's this like network of thoughts and emotions and archetypes that we're all tapping into.
Exactly. Carl Jung, he's the one who really brought this concept to light. He believed these patterns, these archetypes, they're passed down through generations. They shape our myths, our dreams, even our everyday experiences.
Okay, so if we're all connected on the subconscious level, I mean, does that mean our thoughts and actions are, I don't know, are they less ours than we think?
That's the million-dollar question. It takes us straight to the debate about free will versus determinism. Are we really making choices, or are we just playing out some predetermined role?
It's kind of a scary thought, and it brings up all these questions about responsibility. Like, if we're not truly in control, can we really be held accountable for our actions?
Yeah, these are big questions, the kind that legal systems and moral codes have been grappling with forever.
So, no easy answers then.
Not really.
Yeah.
But even if there is this collective unconscious influencing us, we still have conscious minds, right? We can still be aware, reflect, and make choices.
Okay, so we're not just puppets then. We still have some say in things.
Absolutely. And maybe one of the most important things about understanding this collective unconscious is that it shows how connected we all are. You're not isolated. You're part of this vast web of shared experiences and motivations.
It's like we're all interconnected threads in this big tapestry of humanity.
I like that. It makes you think about empathy and compassion. Maybe those feelings are rooted in this deeper connection we all share.
Yeah, if we're all drawing from the same well of human experience, it makes sense that we can understand each other, even if we seem different on the surface.
Right. And it also makes you think about the power of stories, myths, archetypes, those universal symbols. They resonate so deeply because they're tapping into something primal within us.
They're not just stories, they're reflections of the human experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive. We questioned free will, explored the subconscious, and now this collective unconscious. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. We push the boundaries of how we think about the mind.
And before we wrap up, I want to touch on that idea again about our conscious minds being more like storytellers than decision makers.
Yeah, that's a key concept that ties everything together.
So our subconscious might be initiating actions, but our conscious mind creates the narrative, the story of our lives.
We try to make sense of things, create meaning, understand who we are.
It's like we're all writing our own autobiographies.
I like that analogy. And this storytelling, it's not a bad thing. It helps us connect, find purpose, make sense of the world.
We're all the protagonists of our own stories with heroes and villains and plot twists.
And like any good story, there's always room for growth and unexpected turns.
So even if we're not always in control of the script, we can still influence the direction, make choices that shape our character and our path.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in, mindfulness, intentional action. By understanding our motivations, we can make choices that align with our values.
This has been incredible, truly mind-blowing. We've challenged assumptions, explored the depths of the mind, and glimpsed this interconnectedness of the collective unconscious.
A true deep dive into the mysteries of consciousness.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep pondering these ideas, keep exploring, and until next time, stay curious.